The Lifestylist, episode 99, featuring Sharon Salzberg.
I'm Luke Storey, a former celebrity fashion stylist and founder of School of Style. For the past 20 years, I've been relentlessly dedicated to my deepest passion, designing the ultimate lifestyle based on the most powerful principles of health and spirituality. The Lifestylist podcast is a show dedicated to sharing my discoveries and the experts behind them with you. Okay, before we dip into this super chill meditative trance with our guest Sharon Salzberg, I need to get you hyped for a couple of my upcoming appearances. First one being the Noya House Hollywood on November 2nd, 2:30 to 3:30 p.m., where I'll be presenting my brand new lifestyle design level 1 urban biohacking boot camp. This is where I'm going to teach you how to create a healthy and natural way of life while living in a big city. Now, this is a totally free workshop, but you must RSVP. They don't let bums just wander in there. It's a members-only club. It's kind of fancy. So to get in, just go to lukestorey.com/events to sign up. Now, space is really limited because, there's only so much room. So hurry up and get yourself registered to avoid getting dissed. Next up is something I'm really, really excited about. It's one of my all-time favorite festivals out in Malibu Canyon, and that is Mercado Sagrado on November 4th and 5th, where I'll be presenting Elemental Alchemy, biohacking your water, air, earth, and light. Mercado Sagrado is one of the coolest events I've ever been to, and I've been doing some pretty badass stuff in my life. It's a lifestyle celebration in the canyon spirit, featuring musical performances, handmade and artisan goods, organic food, lectures, workshops like mine, film screenings, experiential activities such as intuitive reading, sound baths, aura photography, vibrational medicine with things like amp coil and all kinds of rad stuff. It's mind-blowingly cool. So to get in, go to mercado-sagrado.com to get your tickets. And remember, anytime you need tickets or any information on any upcoming appearances or speaking engagements that I'm doing, you can always easily and quickly find them at lukestorey.com/events. So get over there, get yourself signed up, and I will see you soon. It's time for a shout out to my friends over at Organifi.com. Everyone knows that green juice is good for you now, right? You see it like in 7-Eleven. There's green juice everywhere. I love my green juice, but there's a couple problems with it. One, it usually comes in plastic, which is less than ideal. Two, it's loaded with sugar. A lot of these green juices that you think are healthy have like 25 grams of sugar. That's like a green Coca-Cola. Not good. But mainly the issue with the green juice phenomenon, for me personally, is that they're not very portable. Even if it comes in glass and it doesn't have sugar, I have to drink the whole thing at once if I'm in my car, I'm traveling or something like that. So they're just not quite convenient all of the time. And they'll just go bad if you leave them sitting there. So what Organifi has done is created this amazing superfood green juice blend that comes in a powdered form in a little packet that you can just throw in a bottle of water, any other drink, and make an instant, super powerful green juice. So it's got 11 superfoods. It doesn't have any of the swag extra stuff that you don't need. It's just the stuff that you're actually going to feel. So it's got turmeric, chlorella, wheatgrass, spirulina, mint, moringa, ashwagandha, lemon, beets, little matcha green tea for an extra kick there, some coconut water for electrolytes and potassium, and then it's sweetened with monk fruit, which is awesome because it doesn't spike your blood sugar. It's got like a low glycemic index, unlike some of those green juices I mentioned. So it's a really great product. I've been using it for months. You probably heard me talk about it before. I want to share an opportunity with you to save 20% if you want to check it out. All you have to do is go to Organifi.com and enter the code LIFESTYLIST at checkout, and you're going to save 20%. So that's Organifi.com with an I, not a Y. Use the code LIFESTYLIST and save 20%. Check it out. You will not be disappointed. You and I, my friend, are so fortunate. Myself, because I get to host the Lifestylist podcast and sit down and talk to brilliant and fantastic people like Sharon Salzberg. And you, because you get to kick it in your car, on the train, on the bus, on a plane, in your room, in the womb, wherever you happen to reside presently, and listen to these conversations, which I personally think are quite enlightening. This episode being no exception. Our guest Sharon is a central figure in the field of meditation. She's a world-renowned teacher and New York Times best-selling author. She's played a crucial role in bringing meditation and mindfulness practices to the West and into mainstream culture since 1974 when she first began teaching. She's also the co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society and the author of 10 books, including New York Times bestseller Real Happiness, her seminal work, Loving Kindness, and Real Love, her latest release by Flatiron Books, of which I'm a huge fan. I've actually been reading it for the past week or so. Acclaimed for her humorous, down-to-earth teaching style, Sharon offers a secular, modern approach to Buddhist teachings, making them instantly accessible. She's also a regular columnist for On Being, a contributor to the Huffington Post, and host of her own podcast, which I'm a huge fan of, called The Meta Hour. So what went down on this episode? I'm in New York City recording a bunch of podcasts. I hit up my friend Noah because he mentioned that he knows Sharon. I'm like, dude, hook me up with Sharon. I got to try and record her while I'm in the city. Noah kindly introduces me via email. I'm like, yo, Sharon, I know you don't know who I am, but I'm a huge fan. I'd love to record with you. She's like, yeah, dude, no problem. Come on over to my apartment. It was literally recorded on my way to JFK before I split town. It was like the last minute I could possibly get in. And Sharon was so gracious and kind to let me go over to her apartment where we sat down for the following recording. Now, this recording session was really funny, too, because we started out with, like, one of my dreams, which was a meditation. So I'm like, yo, Sharon, could you lead us in a guided meditation as we start the interview? She's like, yeah, of course, that's what I do. So someone that I've been listening to on tapes for years and years is sitting there, like, guiding me through this meditation. And then during the recording, I had all my gear set up. I'm doing a Facebook Live, an Instagram Live. I had a video camera up. I mean, I popped up all this gear. My assistant Valerie helped me set it up, thank God. And then my recorder kept dying in the middle of the interview. And I was like, it was a great spiritual lesson. I was going to say I was mortified, but not really, because who cares? I mean, it's not a big deal. But it was just really annoying because I kept putting in new batteries, but it was plugged in. You know, this is the stuff you go through as a podcast. I had just recorded actually 14 episodes. They all went off without a hitch. And then like the final one, the finale, was someone that I was really excited about. And the damn extension cord, when I got home to LA, I figured out the extension cord had like short circuited or something. And that's why it kept dying. So hopefully my editor can pull this thing together, because there was literally 3 points where I had to stop and be like, excuse me, Miss Salzberg, but I need to fix my gear. Anyway, of course, because she's been meditating since like forever, she was just sitting there laughing, rolling with the punches, not fazed at all, which is a testament to her work. So it was a fun day, to say the least, and one that I will never forget, and hopefully you won't either. Here's what we cover in this episode. We talk about the fact that she's been meditating for exactly as long as I've been alive, what it was like for her to travel to India for her first 10-day Vipassana meditation, and why she went the route of the Buddhist tradition while so many of her contemporaries leaned toward Hindu-based teachings. Why she never chose to take on a spiritual name or wear guru costumes, and how she managed, that's what I call them, and how she managed to avoid the trappings of the spiritual ego. The value in taking a householder's approach to spirituality. Then Sharon treats us to a short, what I call Idiot's Guide to Buddhism, where she breaks down the origins of the tradition and some of its teachers. It was really interesting to me because Buddhism is not something I know a lot about. I follow a few of the teachers, but I still don't totally get it, which you'll definitely pick that up in the course of this interview, because I'm like a curious kid just asking her how all of this stuff works. Then we talk about why she still chooses to live in an insane city like New York City and what value a city like that holds for spiritual growth. Her views on social media and device addiction. Oh, you know, I just busted you, because if you're listening to this podcast, especially on a device, it means you might be addicted to it. We're going to find out if you are and what to do about it. The fine line between making a positive contribution to the world and being a fanatical activist. How she discovered the path to freedom from the mind and why she's devoted her life to teaching it. The fact that in life pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. We explore the idea that mindfulness is not passive, but rather surrendered action. How to become free of negative attachment. What is the hungry ghost and how we can avoid being trapped by our desires. How reincarnation affects our lives. Sharon's views on the value of the 12 steps. Then we talk about Real Love, her 10th book, and what role compassion toward ourselves and others plays in our lives. Lastly, Sharon gives us her prediction on where the current spiritual movement is taking us and how she's hopeful for the future state of mankind's evolution. I'm really pleased to bring you this episode, but before I do, I'd like to invite you to join us for a special bonus bootleg broadcast, episode number 100, featuring your host, yours truly, Luke Storey, live on the Sunset Strip for an intimate exploration into the nature of mind, spirit, and consciousness. That's a bonus episode this Friday in celebration of our 100th show. But until then, I'd like to invite you to dive into the void with our very special guest, Sharon Salzberg. Welcome to the Lifestylist Podcast, Sharon.
Thank you.
It's amazing to be here. That's so fun. I was telling Valerie on the way over here, I was like, I worked with celebrities for 17 years in Hollywood. I got really jaded at the end. I mean, I was rarely starstruck, but I was like, I think I'm nervous. We're going to Sharon Salzberg's apartment right now. What the hell? I had to do some breathing exercises and stuff. I was really beside myself for a moment there.
Well, this is my apartment.
I'm really glad to be here. Yeah, we have a nice vibe going on here too. And I like to see that you're human. You also have a television.
I have a television.
There's not only an altar, but we have an altar and a TV. So
that's right.
We're gonna get real. I thought it could be fun to start out perhaps with a little brief guided meditation for our listeners. How would you feel about that?
I think that's very cool.
Awesome.
Okay, so if you want to just sit comfortably, close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. Sometimes we start actually by listening to sound. Maybe it's the sound of my voice, or maybe wherever you are, there's traffic or some other sound, and it's a way of just relaxing deep inside and allowing your experience to come and go. It's like the sound just washes through you. And then bring your attention into your body and to the breath, the place where you feel the breath most clearly. Maybe that's the nostrils or the chest or the abdomen. Bring your attention to that place and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. And if you find your attention's wandered, you get lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. We say the most important moment in the whole process is the next moment after you've been gone. It's the moment where you realize you've been disconnected. You practice letting go. And you practice beginning again. Just bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. If you have to do that 1 billion times, let go and begin again, that's not a problem. That is the training. That's the process. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes.
When it comes to meditation, I'm never ready.
Well, I always say that. I I didn't feel quite ready either. And then I thought, how long can I go? It's like, it's supposed to be audio, right? It's like,
I know.
How big a silence
it's
can
funny.
I get away with?
As I was watching my thoughts in the middle of the silence, I was thinking, I wonder if the sound editor is going to see a big gap in the waveform and shorten it.
Yeah.
It's funny. But yeah, in the Vedic meditation that I practice, it's 20, the tradition is 20 minutes twice a day. And I'm always asking my teachers that sometimes I feel like going 40 or an hour. He's like, no, you got to, you have to get another training for that, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm ready. Obviously I'm ready because I want to keep going.
Yeah.
But I also like to escape. I'm a big escapist. So as we were discussing, you've been meditating now for 46 years, which is exactly how long I've been alive, which is
congratulations.
Yeah, which is astonishing. That's a really long time. So what a gift to be able to sit down and have a moment of meditation with you, someone who's been doing it forever. And in terms of the meditation, what do you think? Have you had sessions doing, the 10-day Vipassana trainings or anything like that where you've gone for hours and hours? What do you think is the longest in one sit you've ever done?
The longest in one sit? Maybe a couple of hours,
Yeah.
That was how I began. When I began meditating a billion years ago.
Yeah.
I had to go to India pretty well. I mean, I didn't see anywhere in the States where I could actually...
There wasn't a meditation center in every corner of Manhattan?
Not yet. And especially I was going to college in Buffalo, New York. There wasn't one there either.
Right.
And I went to India sort of like my junior year abroad. I'd written a paper for the independent study program saying I wanted to go to India and study meditation. And they said, okay. So I went with my student loans and my scholarships and so on. And in those days, the form, was really intensive 10-day retreats. That's often how you learned. And the teacher was S.N. Goenka, and the style was Vipassana or insight meditation. And it was only much later that people began learning in classes or workshops or on tape or something like that. But that was pretty much the form. So when I walked into that monastery in Bodh Gaya, India, I'd never meditated for a single second before, and there it was in a 10-day course.
Wow, that's a pretty hardcore introduction.
Yeah.
And why do you think you gravitated toward the Buddhist tradition rather than a lot of the people of your generation, Ram Dass and all these other guys who went with more of the traditional, the Gita Hindu kind of scene?
Well, Ram Dass and some large number of people were all at my first retreats, my Buddhist retreats. And I actually said goodbye to the bus that was taking them away from Bodh Gaya in search of Ram Dass's guru named Crowley Baba. And
right.
So Krishnadas and I, we often teach together, he was at that retreat as well. Of course, when I first met them, it was all like Krishnadas was Jeffrey and they had other names.
Everyone was like Bill and Joe. Yeah.
That's right. So Linda.
And through that, you kept your own name, which is interesting.
I did. I mean, I have some other names, but I just never...
You never chose to adopt full-time a spiritual name.
No.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
You weren't drawn to?
I wasn't drawn to it. And they were, they're fine enough names, but they're not,
Yeah, I've always sort of had the feeling that, I guess if you have reverence for your guru or your teacher and they say, hey, this is your spiritual name, it's sort of like, okay, I'm not going to fight with that. But at the same time, it's like, I don't look at myself as my name to begin with. So taking on, because I have a spiritual name through the Kundalini yoga tradition. And honestly, half the time I don't remember what it is. If you quiz me right now, I'd have to look up in Evernote or something. But it's like, I thought, well, I'm not even Luke Storey. Why even identify as a secondary name that is also not me? So anyway, and one thing I've noticed about you too, over the years, is that you've also not adopted all of the other sort of theatrics in terms of, the wardrobe and the silk pillows and flowers and the whole kind of spiritual show. Do you think that was another thing that you just never gravitated toward, or did you make a conscious decision to kind of just be a real normal person named Sharon?
I think I am just a real normal person named Sharon, so it was kind of inevitable in a way. And there's a certain extent in which, I don't know, maybe it was a conscious decision, but it wasn't a highly, labored decision.
Right.
What should I do?
Should I put on the orange robe or not? Oh my God, let me meditate on this.
Well, all those things also have meaning. The robes mean certain vows, right? And I mean, one could wear it casually, but that would be kind of odd too. Like, I look like a nun, but I'm not really,
Right.
I don't follow any of the rules,
Right. Yeah, I think there's sort of two sides of that from my perspective, is that there are some people who are highly devotional, right? And some of that way that they're representing themselves to the world sort of sends a message to people on the street like, hey, I'm on a different trip right now, so leave me alone. You know, like when you see like a Catholic nun, you're sort of, even if you're not Catholic, I tend to have a certain reverence for them. Like, oh, wow, okay, they're a devotional person, and you give a certain respect to them, and maybe even some leniency in terms of their behavior. Like if I go to yoga and someone's wearing a turban and all white, I'm kind of like, okay, they're allowed to be a little weirder than your average person, you know? So there's that side of it, but is there not, from your perspective, also the side where the ego can sort of co-opt a spiritual person or spiritual teacher and kind of create yet another false identity out of that?
Oh, certainly that can happen. And I think, you know, it's one thing to live in India, which is in a way what I always thought I would do, is live in India forever, which didn't happen. And so it's one thing to live there where you can be a guy wearing an orange skirt or, you know,
I've done that.
Never put on shoes or whatever, you know, it's okay. And being here where you're really making a statement of difference and often dependence, you know, like I'm not carrying money, therefore you have to take care of me. Or, you know, and so that's like a negotiation with a culture. Like, how do you want to represent to people? And do you want people here to feel that difference? You know, might it not be better for somebody who's a nursery school teacher or a special ed teacher or a nurse or something to look at you and think, oh, maybe I can meditate too.
Right,
you know, in my actually kind of stressful job, you know.
Right, to sort of represent the householder approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's cool. Yeah, I think at different places in my journey, not that I ever adopted so much the outward look, but there have definitely been times where I've attained some level of understanding and development, and then unbeknownst to me, the egos come in and went, oh, now you're spiritual, and you're going to go show everyone how spiritual you are, which is like so detestable in a sense. It's almost like if I'm just going to be unconscious and just be like an egoically based person, I'd almost like just grab the Lamborghini and the Rolex and just go that way. But it's creeped me out just subjectively when at various times in my development I've looked and thank God was able to have that witness perspective and go, oh my God, I'm kind of being gross right now. I'm like plain spiritual. So it's interesting.
Well, that's one possibility, but then maybe there are other possibilities, which are also just different interpretations of the same act. Like I and many people I know say coming back from India when you were a baby, you know, it was kind of scary being back here. And the really special and important things we'd learned about love and about the mind and about the heart and life and so on seemed fragile, that learning. And you wanted to, like, kind of wear all white or drink chai, which no one was drinking, no one, you know, or in those days wear Birkenstocks, you know, which were brand new, or, you know, there was something you wanted to help remind you that, oh yeah, you know, I'm not the person who left here some years ago, or I'm not the person who got so confused about what life was about.
That's interesting. So sort of clues or reminders to keep.
And it was fear, you know, it was like protection. I need to protect this. And then, of course, insight grows and it protects us. We don't have to protect it, you know.
Right.
You don't have to be like, no, Grandma, I can't watch TV. I'm too pure, you know. Like, you don't have to be off-putting that way.
Well, I think that's one thing that attracts me to you and your work is that you're very relatable. You know, it's like, I think for someone who's approaching spirituality from a more skeptical point of view, the more dogmatic the teacher or teaching is, the more off-putting it is. And one of my goals with this show is to present people like you to the audience, to the world, that are accessible and relatable, to where I think it has the most impact that way, where it's like, oh, I can be a normal person and still live a spiritual life. It doesn't have to be, you know, a celibate monastic life in a cave somewhere, and I can still, you know, attain some degree of enlightenment in this lifetime. So can you give us the Idiot's Guide to Buddhism? I know this is probably a longer talk than perhaps we have time for, but it's interesting to me that the Buddha was from India, yet you learned primarily a lot of your studies in Burma, if I'm not mistaken, and then it seems to be very centered in Tibet. And I've been to India. I didn't see any traces of Buddhism in all of southern India, and I was there for a month. You know, it was like definitely the Hindu situation, a few Sikhs poking around here and there. So what's the short version of the history of Buddhism and how it sort of came to spread out of India into these other areas?
Well, I spent years in India actually, but studying with Burmese or Tibetan teachers.
Interesting.
So they weren't really actually ethnically Indian teachers at that time. Now, although Goenka, I think ethnically was Indian, but he'd grown up in Burma, or his life was really in Burma. He needed a visa to get back into India when he came back and began teaching. So the Buddha, they say, was born in this town Lumbini, which is now it's Nepal. It's just the southern part of Nepal, so India, Nepal, like that. And after his time, the teaching spread to Sri Lanka and then up around, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Burma, those countries, Cambodia, and then up north, Korea, China, Japan.
I see.
And Tibet, was its own trajectory there. So the heart of it is really Bodh Gaya, which is the town the Buddha was enlightened in, which is in Bihar. It's about 6 hours from Benares, and that's where I actually began practice.
Cool! You went right to the sea.
I went right there.
That's cool. That's cool.
And
did you know that at the time?
Yeah,
I mean, that was the goal. Okay.
Yeah, the descendant of the tree it said the Buddha was sitting under when he became enlightened is there. So
I see.
It's an amazing place. It's kind of like Mecca for Buddhists.
Right. Right. And why are so many of the teachers have the word Rinpoche in their name?
It's in Tibetan, in the Tibetan system. It's a title.
I see.
It means
so it's like sir or lord or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like precious one or...
right. Because I first heard like Trungpa Rinpoche, I think, was like the first guy. And then I was like, wait, does he have a lot of cousins that were also like Buddhist teachers? Okay, cool.
No, it can be really confusing, especially if you're looking for a book.
Right.
It's like by Rinpoche. Well, which Rinpoche?
Yeah. You start Googling the word Rinpoche, a lot comes up. So that's funny. Okay, cool. And so here you are in New York City after all these years. Do you still live here because you love the grind of New York City, or are you here as a service to your fellow man to be someone that's accessible and is offering teachings and helping people learn to meditate and be more mindful here? I mean, is it a labor of love, or do you actually walk out onto Fifth Avenue here and be like, I like it here still?
I do like it here. That's why I'm here. I actually officially live in Massachusetts, in Barre, Massachusetts, where I have a retreat center that I helped co-found, the Insight Meditation Society. I have a house there. I vote there.
Right.
I used to say my books were there, but my books are everywhere now. And especially on my Kindle. And some years ago, I was working on this book called Faith, and I just had this feeling I wanted to get out of Barre. That I wanted to go somewhere else, and I happened to have a friend who was going to Barre to sit a 3-month retreat, and she said, "Well, take my apartment in New York." So I did, and that was a few blocks from here, actually. And I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Washington Heights, near the George Washington Bridge. And I had come back now and then. It was always like really noisy and jangly. But this time, actually living here for that 3-month period, I just loved it. I was really happy, and I felt really creatively stimulated. I was hanging out with writers and artists, and and I was teaching, and it was a really beautiful experience. So I thought, maybe I'll come back. And so I started a period where I was coming in for 2 or 3 months at a time and subletting an apartment. Then I'd leave and come back 6 months later. And then at one point I thought, what would it be like just to have a place? I wouldn't be there all the time by any means, but it would be there, and so that's been the last several years that I've done that.
And in all of these years in New York City, in terms of, for lack of a better term, what we might call the consciousness scene, the yogis, the meditation centers, all of this sort of community here, this subculture. How have you seen that change? Because as a pretty recent visitor in the past 9-10 years been coming here, it seems like, and I don't know if I was just not tapped into the wavelength, but it seems like there's an explosion of commerce and people in this community now. Do you think it's at its height, or is it just sort of a cycle that we're coming back around to? And was it the same way in 73 and now it's just kind of a trend's come back, or do you see momentum? Oh,
no, it's vastly different than 73. I actually came back in 74. It's vastly, vastly different than it was then. And I don't know where it'll go because, and it's like, it's always changing. It's like there were all those yoga centers to begin with and maybe 3 vegetarian restaurants, and people, I'd be wearing like an Indian shirt and people would say to me, "Where did you get that?" And I'd say, "India." That's where it came from. And
Right.
And so there's been an explosion of interest in Indian culture and music and clothing and food, and that's changed too. But and then there were yoga centers everywhere, and then yoga centers were including meditation, and then meditation centers started springing up. And now you and I met at Mindful, just mindful without any vowels. So I'm always saying it in a funny way. Mindful. Mindful, which are like mindfulness studios,
right?
With ongoing programs, 35-minute classes, 45-minute classes, whatever it is, meditating, various forms of meditation, and that's what it does. And they're starting to spring up everywhere.
What's been the most dry period here in terms of when was like the lowest consciousness of this city? Would you say, from that perspective?
Well, that's hard to say because there's always been a counterculture.
Right.
So I think it's always been alive and thriving to some extent, underground in a way. But the kind of commercialization or popularization is something very new, and the kind of widespread interest is something very new.
So you think you could say we're sort of at the pinnacle now based on what you've observed?
I don't know if it's the pinnacle. It might be the beginning.
Yeah, maybe it is, right?
It could be the beginning.
Right. One can hope that it keeps going from here, right?
Yeah.
I know I've really enjoyed like my recent trips here just because I was telling you before we recorded, I'm meeting the most fascinating people, and a lot of them are really young. I'm 46, and it's like I'm meeting kids that are like 19, 20, and they're telling me, we're talking about spiritual concepts that are like way beyond what I hear 19-year-olds or 20-year-olds talking about a few years ago. You'd have to talk to someone who had quite a lot of life experience under their belt and have been seeking for a long time. And so there are times where I'm cautiously borderline dismissive when I meet someone really young who's into spirituality and is going to like tell me how to be in the now or something. But I'm hopefully open-minded enough to listen. I go, God damn, they're pretty on point. It's really encouraging.
Yeah.
It's very cool to meet people that are young and are actually really doing the work, So another thing I noticed about you is, you're here in the city, you talk all over town. If you look on Sharon's website, you guys, she's like literally everywhere every day, which I was amazed I could get you here today. But for someone who's as widely known as you are within this community, you seem very approachable and accessible. Do you have to sort of protect yourself, like in certain cases that there are spiritual groupies that start bugging you and hanging around? You know what I mean? Like, do you have to have any sort of buffer with the world so that people don't constantly invade your space and sort of siphon energy from you, so to speak?
I guess I just do naturally because I feel like I have a life, you're not going to publish my apartment building, right?
No, of course not.
Nobody really knows what it is.
Of course not.
No, most people don't have my cell phone number. I'm very readily accessible by email, but I always counsel patience, because it takes me sometimes a really long time to get back to somebody. And I don't really say to people, I'll see you individually, because I just can't. Too many people. But it's beautiful. How wonderful that people will want to spend time with me or anybody, with that kind of honesty and openness. And
another thing I've noticed about you is you're in your 60s, but you're very like hip and active on social media. There's a lot of people in their 60s. Yeah, I'm like, wow, you're like doing Instagram stories and all sorts of stuff. I can't even get my tribe that are in their 30s sometimes to figure that stuff out. I'm like, come on, you guys get up to speed. Like you're multimedia here. But do you enjoy the aspect of that far reach that you have with our modern social media?
I do. The main thing that I'm on almost all the time is Twitter.
Oh, that's your main. That's your main jam?
Thing. Okay. And the rest I play in.
Right.
But it was something about the brevity, just like it's like a haiku.
It is, yeah.
Here's the thing, and
it's like the Tao of social media.
Yeah.
Right.
I just really liked it. Although I just had a really weird experience in that I was in Washington D.C. the other day, and I taped a podcast with Congressman Tim Ryan, who's a congressman from Ohio, who's a meditator who wrote a book called The Mindful Nation. And I spent a bunch of time in his office waiting for him because he was in Congress actually voting. And he came back, and we had this nice podcast, which will go up at some point. And then he and I gave a talk together that night. And there was a journalist from the Washington Post there, so she put on Twitter something about that talk. And the headline was sort of a quote from Tim in which he said, speaking of our times, don't add hatred to hatred. He said, I don't see the point of adding hatred to hatred. Right? So that was kind of the message. So she put that up on Twitter. And then in my mentions, because my name was there along with Tim's, I started seeing all these comments. People were writing to him, which were full of hatred and really vile, and then
how
really, sadly
ironic.
It was very ironic and very intense. I was like, oh my God, and then Dan Harris, who's also a friend of ours, who's an ABC News anchor.
Yeah.
He retweeted it. So then I started seeing all these comments to Dan. Like, you scumbag, you call yourself a journalist. I go, oh my God,
Right.
And I thought, oh, this is the other side of social media, which I don't usually get,
Yeah.
And it's very intense as people feel free to say anything.
Yeah, that's the thing with and luckily, I think you're in a space that's not inflammatory, you know what I mean? Because you're not like so politically active, like maybe someone like Marianne Williamson is a spiritual teacher, but has no problem delving into the political arena. So I'm sure she gets her fair share of trolling. But what I find interesting about that form of negativity is that I think a lot of people that perpetuate that behavior are really sort of have this cowardice. And that they would never say the things that they say if it was in person. It's sort of like it's like this kid that was picked on in school that has this pain body, and is now projecting that pain onto whoever they see fit. But they really probably wouldn't have the balls to do that in person. It's like if you could see the little creep in their apartment, like behind those vile attacks, right? It's like, I remember those are the kids in school that talk shit to the bully and then run and hide behind the teacher, that kind of thing. It's just, it's an interesting thing. But I interviewed a guy named David Wolf, who's a big health guru, and he talks about flat earth and aliens. He's really out there and draws a lot of criticism from, both, I would say, kind of the left and right spectrum. And he just gets trolled so hard because he has no filter. And I asked him, I said, dude, how does that not break your heart? How do you deal with that being a public person and getting so much negativity toward you? And his answer was very earnest and very wise. He just said, Luke, you know what, man? When I see that stuff, I feel so much compassion for the people doing it, because you can just imagine like how miserable their life has to be to where like that's what energizes them, and they're spending their time and they're actually giving thought and feeling to something that negative. Yeah. He's like, can you imagine what that must feel like? And it was such a beautiful way to do that. It wasn't even like, oh, I just blessed them. It was really like a heartfelt understanding of what it must feel like to be in that position. So, but lucky for you, you're just all good vibes. You don't have to deal with any haters. So far, I've been very fortunate in that respect too. I'm sure, I wouldn't doubt that it's coming, because I have a lot of funny things that I talk about. In terms of that, being proactive and activism and wanting to have a positive influence on the world and someone putting themselves out there, I see what I determine to be sort of a lot of like do-gooderism and people naively, if not at times arrogantly, deciding that the world needs to be changed and that it shouldn't be the way it is. And I'm going to set out and change the world. Where does wanting to contribute positive energy and positive change in the world start, and sort of being naive and arrogant about deciding what needs to change? In other words, how can someone... It's hard to articulate. So the Gandhi thing, like be the change you want to see in the world. I interpret that as like just work on your own shit, get more conscious, wake up more, be more spiritual, and that just has a ripple effect on mankind, because you're really polite to the cab driver and you just start being this, this wave of love. But then there's other people that's not enough, and they want to go out and protest and like shake things up a bit. Where do you think the balance is there?
Well, I don't know that the other side of the other option is only protesting.
I'm polarizing it to the two extremes.
I think there are other actions. I think, whether one only has to change oneself or one has to participate in some other action. That might be protesting. It might be art. It could be something that really expands consciousness. It could be seeking systems change. For me, what is really a passion of mine is having people vote, because I think it's when we change ourselves, and I talked to Tim about this actually, it came up the other night. When we change ourselves, I think the thing that manifests really strongly is good-heartedness. You see a person on the street asking for money and you don't consider them subhuman, There is a real sense of compassion and care. Whether or not you give them money, might depend on other things, if you're committed to sobriety and you don't think they're sober, or sometimes people take resolves. I don't care what they're going to do with the money. I'm going to give it to them. Whether you give them the money or not, there is a kind of recognition of their worth as a human being, even though they're in that situation. Whether you then start thinking, I wonder what the housing policy is of this city, and if there's kind of inequity there, and if that policy could change, maybe fewer people would be homeless. That I don't think comes from just that kind of inner work. That comes from a certain education and an inclination to think about systems. And I think that isn't a bad thing. That doesn't have to be self-righteous or weird or imposing on other people. I think it's paying attention in a different way, which we're not used to. I'm not used to. And I think it's not a bad time, given where the earth is, to start adding that to a spiritual agenda.
Yeah.
And, we've got to do the inner work, otherwise we're coming from a weird place, and it's not well motivated. And
maybe it might be motivated from a sense of control or something like that, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's the root of the question, is sort of like surrendered action.
Yeah.
Where it's like you give the performance, you apply positive energy into the world, but maybe perhaps not as attached to your idea of what you think it should turn out as.
Well, that I think it's always good not to be that attached,
Yeah.
But I don't believe in moral relativism. I don't believe it's all just a question of getting together and having a nice conversation for a change,
Right.
I think that some actions are wrong. I mean, some of my actions are wrong. It's not I'm perfect.
Yeah.
But we can sit down and have a nice chat forever, and you're not going to convince me that, killing girl babies is correct action. It's not.
Right.
And it's not a question of respecting someone else's culture either,
Yeah.
And I think that, we need to be able to care about everybody and have compassion for everybody and try to make the world safer for other people.
Right.
As well as ourselves, and try to create a better situation in this world. And that's why I'm really into voting. That's not a very popular position in all spiritual circles. I've had a lot of people say to me,
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, like I said, with the exception of Marianne Williamson, I can't think of too many other people that are prominent spiritual teachers that even have any outwardly facing position on anything, because it's not their path. It's like they're working on the inner game.
Yeah. Yeah, and I never tell people who to vote for. I mean, I don't think that's correct,
Right.
But I think the idea of participating in that system, because other people are counting on it.
Sure.
Like people for whom a tiny difference makes a big difference.
If you're walking down the street and a homeless street person approaches you and it's very clear that they're intoxicated and that you have a pretty good inclination that they're going to go cop with that money, would you give them money or not, or does it matter to you what they're going to do with it?
Mostly it doesn't matter to me, but sometimes, it might for some reason. I mean, the reason I use it as an example is because I was with a friend once who was very committed to her sobriety, which was new for her. And we'd gone to dinner, and then we were walking home, and somebody asked for money. Someone stopped us in the street and asked for money. And she said to him, I'm not going to give you any money, but let's go into a deli, and I will buy you anything that you want. And he was really touched, because it's one of the things about that life that's also true is you don't have choices. You don't wake up thinking, I think I'll have pizza today, It's not like that. And he kept saying, we were in the deli, and he kept saying, anything? Anything? And she said, yeah, anything.
It's like even the biggest foot-long sandwich?
Yeah, even that? You're not going to have that on that sandwich? and that was her decision based on all the circumstances of her life.
It's a curiosity to me because I too have been sober for a long time, 20 years now, and I'm very grateful for it, very committed to it, not by virtue, but by necessity.
Yeah.
And I sort of struggle with that in the beginning too. I live in Hollywood. I mean, it's warm there. You got homeless guys everywhere. Most of them seem to be like they have some substance abuse problems. And at first I was like, I'm not getting money. He's just going to buy a beer. And then I thought, Luke, you selfish dick. It's like when I needed that medicine, I needed that medicine. Yeah. So it's almost like the best thing you could do for an alcoholic is let them buy their beer because that's that's how they're getting by, man. And additionally, you might just be helping them hit a bottom faster. I think if someone had given me some lottery winnings when I was 22, I might have gotten sober at 23 because things got so dark so fast. I made it to 26 because I didn't have the money to really, take it to the nth degree. So that's an interesting concept to explore. I mean, to me, it's sort of like, it's none of my business. It's but there's also times where I'm not intuitively guided to have an exchange with someone. In fact, last night someone's like, hey you. I'm just like, block, force field, not interested. We're not having a conversation. The energy was way too dark to even be like, oh, hey, I'm going to be compassionate. It's like, I'm good. And speaking of compassion, how have you been able to achieve forgiveness for people in your life that have really, really wronged you? Just someone has textbook effed you over. You'd win in a court of law, but yet you've been able to become free of that condemnation of them. Yeah.
I think this is a 12-step saying. I'm not really sure, but I think so. Somebody once said to me, he was talking about his relationship to someone else who'd wronged him, and he was obsessed with it, and like, obsessed.
Resentment.
Yeah.
The definition, as I understand, is to re-feel.
Yeah, and he was really caught, and he said, I've let that guy live rent-free in my brain for too long. That's what I think might be a 12-step saying.
Yeah, I've heard that said.
And that really struck me. Like, that's the consequence of the resentment and the obsession. It's not that the other person's suffering more, you're suffering more.
Yeah.
So it's really been out of compassion for myself that I've worked with, like, just let it go. Let the universe take care of them. I don't have to be an agent of revenge. I'm not going to go out and try to harm them anyway. I'm just going to think about it all the time,
Right.
Wouldn't it be more pleasant to think about something else?
Like drinking the poison, hoping they'll die.
That's right, yeah. And I kind of like the Dalai Lama, who's really, kind of plain spoken and homey about a lot of things. And he said, basically, if you have an enemy and you just get obsessed with it, you can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't enjoy anything. He said, why give them that satisfaction? They have now taken over your life, and you don't want that. So I kind of work on it from that point of view.
Have you experienced in recent years any really bad betrayal?
I think not in really recent years. But, I mean, we can interpret anything as a betrayal, right? I haven't necessarily had that interpretation for some time, but, you see it all the time. Somebody dies and someone else takes it as a betrayal. Wait a minute, you're gone.
Right.
Or life doesn't work out and we take it as a betrayal.
Right. Every April 15th I get betrayed. I guess it does depend on how you contextualize it. Yeah. And is it not from your perspective or the general Buddhist perspective that pain is inevitable but suffering is optional?
Yeah, that's one way of saying
based on the way that, this has been my experience, based on the way that I frame a situation. Oh, I missed the plane. Oh, see, this always happens. These assholes. Oh, the cab, this and that. Right. It's like I was telling you with my hotel room. The AC broke. I was just about to record a podcast. And for a moment, my mind was like, oh, here we go. See, I'm trying to do good work and help people in the world and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, thank God for meditation. I was able to really quickly see, oh, yeah, my mind is having a little temper tantrum. Uh-huh. And then they ended up upgrading me to a fantastic room that I would, at this present time in my life, not be able to afford by any stretch. And then I got in the new room, was like, oh man, thank God the AC broke. Yeah. That was a really simplistic version of that kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly.
It's just really, really about perception. So how can one change the habitual negativity, that negativity bias to where as you're living your life in real time, you can reframe situations in which you might feel betrayed or wronged or you have bad luck or something.
Yeah, well, everything, certainly from the Buddhist point of view, depends on awareness, right? You have to feel the pain you're inflicting on yourself and know that you could say that there's pain anyway. Pain is inevitable. And we get disappointed. We don't get what we want, You get moved to that fantastic suite and something else breaks down, or whatever. Life has its disappointments and they hurt. I think it's kind of unfair to ourselves to expect that feels the same as success. It doesn't feel the same as success. It's painful. But then we have the question of extra pain, where we think, this is the only thing I'll ever feel, or this is my fault, I shouldn't feel this. I've spent all that money in therapy, why do I feel this? Or, I've lost control, this is so terrible. Or, we just we pile on. That we don't need. We didn't need all that extra suffering, but you can watch and see, look what's starting, And because what we are practicing, just like we practiced for those few minutes, is letting go without judgment and beginning again. We do it right there in that life situation. We've done it 1 billion times in our meditation, and it carries over.
Would you say that in terms of the ability to do that if one's overall life is coming from a position of surrender, that it's easier to have acceptance for those little micro inconveniences?
What do you mean by surrender?
Surrender, I mean that, like in my particular case, I've accepted that I really don't know what serves the highest good for myself, and I'm constantly working to bring myself back into alignment with the creator that made the world and made me, and that I accept knows better about what's best for me than I do, and so I'm really, it's hard to say it in a way that doesn't sound religious, but for lack of a better way to term it, would just be like to seek the will of God, which is like really the basis of sobriety, the basis of the 12 steps is you've accepted that your limited resources as a single human being, aren't going to get you where you want to go and be able to produce a fulfilling, meaningful life, and so surrendering to me is the acceptance that there is some other source of power and intelligence, and if I can align myself to it, I'm going to have a better time. So that's my kind of own definition, is to stop fighting. Is to stop fighting reality. Reality is reality. And it's going to be heaven or hell based on the degree to which I can accept each of those little moments. But it seems to me that's, in my experience, has become much easier because the context of my life is coming from just a generally more surrendered place. Like, I'm done trying to be the boss of my own life. Does that kind of fit within your framework, or how would you?
Well, I wouldn't, just again, it's just, Buddhist languaging, you wouldn't talk about a higher power and other source.
Yeah.
So I'm translating the whole while,
Yeah.
My problem with the word surrender is not a personal problem. It's just using it, and hearing people respond, sometimes thinking that's so passive. That means you never do anything about anything,
Right.
Which it can't mean, because then you're just victimized by everything, right? It's one of the
someone steals your wallet walking down the street, and you're like, oh, I just have to accept it.
That's right. That's right, exactly, And it's one of the problems with the word mindfulness, as it's currently used. I mean, all the definitions of mindfulness are correct. The popular ones, they're not incorrect. They are correct, but we tend to misconstrue what they mean. Like mindfulness means accepting things the way that they are. Mindfulness means being with your experience without judging, so which for some people sounds awfully passive. Like I was once teaching somewhere and I began the meditation just as we began when I said, let's sit and listen to sound. And somebody raised their hand right away and said, well, what if it's the sound of the smoke alarm I hear going off? Should I sit here mindfully knowing the smoke alarm is going off? Or should I get up? And I said, I'd get up, But it makes sense, that question, because the words surrender, accept, without judgment, that's what they mean to us. So, in contrast, it's a very vibrant, dynamic state where we're not seeking control over what we could never control. We just want to connect very fully with what is. And there is responsiveness and action and movement that's born of that.
Perhaps a surrendered action where
Yeah.
I'm exerting some degree of will and effort to change or remove myself from a situation without being imbued with negativity and fighting it along the way.
That's right.
So I can say, like, you know what? I actually don't like having a flat tire on the side of the road. I'm just going to sit there and take a goddamn nap. You know, I'm going to get out and I'm going to fix the tire, but I'm going to be mindful not to get pissed off about the fact that I got a flat tire.
That's right. Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I love that. Time for a quick yet crucial break. So I, your host, Luke Storey, am a huge fan of podcasts. In fact, that's why I started my own, and that's why you're listening to it right now. But one thing that's always driven me crazy when I listen to shows is that there'll be so many resources and links and things mentioned by the host and or the guest on a show that I can never remember it all. I don't write it down. I have no way to like go Google something or look it up when I get home, but there's so much value there, right? So I realized that there's an issue with this. I've solved it for you. I put together a newsletter every single week that contains all of the links, everything you can click on from every single resource mentioned during my shows. So all you have to do to get this emailed to you is get on my mailing list. It's not a tacky, corny email list where I send you all kind of weird stuff. I just announce when I have a show and send you all the resources from each episode. It's pretty sweet, actually. Me and my crew take a lot of time, energy, and money to produce these newsletters, and they're full of value, and I want you to have it. So here's what you do. Go to lukestorey.com. Right on the homepage, you're going to see a tab that says Join the Evolution. Click on that, enter your name and email, and I'll send it to you every week. That's lukestorey.com. Click on Join the Evolution, sign up for the newsletter, and all of this info will be in your inbox. You don't have to worry about stopping to write anything down. And now, back to the interview. I do want to try and stick within the framework of the Buddhist vernacular because it's not something I'm that familiar with. It hasn't been my path, but it obviously correlates to everything I've ever heard. And there's a lot of use of the term, non-attachment.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult term also these days, especially because of attachment theory and psychology, where the very thing you want is attachment. You want secure attachment. Here, too, I sometimes substitute the word control for the word attachment within the Buddhist context to sort of get a glimpse of what it means. It doesn't really mean the same thing as in psychology when they talk about secure attachment. It means something else, and even attachment in the Buddhist context is not bad or wrong or terrible. It's a sure path to suffering. That's the point. So you don't have to think, I'm bad, I'm terrible, I'm awful, because I have all this attachment. But let's take a look, Those times we try to control someone who cannot be controlled or something.
I.e. everything and everyone.
That's right.
Ultimately, right?
We suffer.
Yeah.
And that suffering doesn't stand anyone in good stead. It's not like the source of effective action in the world or making a change. We simply suffer. And it kind of brings us down. So non-attachment really means, I consider non-attachment a state really of honor. It's like if you go to a meeting and someone has this huge agenda in the sense of things have got to work out this one way and they can't hear anything else, they can't consider options, they can't consider maybe a more creative solution, it's got to be this one thing, that's a big agenda, right? And they're attached. Whereas if we have more of an open mind and, open view and let's see what makes sense or, let me pay attention to what really feels like it has integrity or something like that, that's a very different way of being. And that's what I would call non-attachment. It doesn't mean you don't care or that you're going to say, what the hell, let's do it any old way, get it done. It's not like that at all, but you don't have that fixedness, it's got to be this one way.
So would you say if one's working on themselves and wanting to progress in life, that there is a way to have goals and set an intention and sort of, do your due diligence, do the work along the way, but the non-attached point of view then would be to not be so invested in the results being a particular way. Mm-hmm. So it's more about the path maybe than the arrival point or the destination.
Yeah, I think we do have goals. I think it's realistic to think we don't have a goal. Otherwise, why bother? 20 minutes twice a day.
Right. I think it goes back. Yeah, I think it goes back to the same thing. The thread we're on, which is like that. If you're non-attached and you're not trying to control, that doesn't. The converse of that isn't necessarily at the other end of the spectrum in apathy, where you're just like, okay, whatever. Yeah. I guess I'll just be spiritual and just sit on the cushion all day long. Yeah. And that's really. I mean, that's the purpose of, I think, at least for me, the spiritual pursuit and all the meditating and the chanting and the yoga and going to India is to achieve some degree of peace so that then I can go actually share who I really am in the absence of all of those weird quirks and personality flaws and egoic positions with the world.
That's right.
It's like, wow. So it's almost like I don't have to add anything. I just have to remove some things. And when you remove those, then who you are shines forth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. This is good. What about cravings, addictions, desires, or from what I've heard some teachers, I don't know if I've heard you use this word, but the hungry ghost.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, that's like the best. That's a great name for a band, actually. Hungry Ghost.
It probably is a band.
It probably is. We'll have to Google it. But what's your take on that whole, it's another side of the mind and the ego to constantly be like feeding that rapacious lower nature that just constantly wants, whether it's validation or material things or whatever.
Well, the hungry ghost is a figure in Buddhist cosmology.
Oh, cool.
Where there are many realms of not only is there rebirth in very kind of classical Buddhist teaching, but there's many realms of existence. You're not necessarily always reborn a human, for example. You might be reborn in a higher world or a lower world, or, you might be a tortoise, or you might be a demigod, or, it's like, there's lots of possibilities, and we kind of go round and round and round and round. It's not linear, up and out.
So not linear. So not like you're a cockroach, then you work your way up to a lizard, then you're a rat, then you're a rabbit, then you're a deer, then you're an elephant, then you're and so on and so on.
Not necessarily, no.
Interesting.
Yeah.
If you screw up and you're at the state of an enlightened master, and you're just about to break through to possible not reincarnated, and then you kill or rape or do something horrendous, then in the Buddhist spectrum, would you then kind of re-enter at a lower thing and have to work back toward?
Possibly. I mean, it was one of the questions the Buddha counseled. You don't think about too much because you can't figure it out.
Right.
It's such a complex coming together of all these different conditions. He said, you'll just go crazy. So
so don't even bother trying to figure it out. Just stay on the path. It's the thing we're just saying, like, stay on the path. Don't worry about what happens.
Right. So the hungry ghost is one of those realms.
Okay.
Which is marked obviously by intense desire, and these beings who have like these tiny little mouths, so they can never get enough. It's like that, and so there are all these like outrageous pictures of them. That graphic display of what that mind state is like.
That is such an uncomfortable way to live.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of years in that.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen anyone overcome acute alcoholism or drug addiction just purely with taking a Buddhist path?
I mean, I consider the 12-step system a work of genius, and the languaging, is not for everybody.
Yeah. Fairly Judeo-Christian.
Yeah. So that doesn't maybe work for everybody just in terms of language, but the actual system I think is just brilliant. Fellowship and helping others, and it's just amazing.
Would you say that the system of the 12 steps have a lot in common in principle to Buddhism?
That's what I hear. And I think that's probably true. Although I think it's in terms of structure and kind of manifestation, it's way ahead of Buddhism in this country because of the community aspect, and the ways people kind of come together and help each other. I've often said I wish there was a 12-step group for everything.
Right.
Like every part of the human condition.
Yeah. I've often thought that too, that there could really be a group for like Thinkers Anonymous.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody.
You take anyone on the street and say like, are you powerless or do you have control? And they say, oh no, I can do whatever I want. Just try to stop thinking. How long does it take between thoughts? It's like none of us have that ability, right? Yeah. So have you ever seen, in all of your retreats and all this stuff, have you ever seen someone come in and be totally ignorant of or not choosing the path of, say, the 12 steps and come in and just thoroughly devote themselves to the practice and to the meditation and be sort of released from that?
I think I have, and I think an interesting thing to check out, which I don't really know thoroughly or understand, is alternative movements of recovery besides kind of classical 12-step, like Noah Levine who wrote years ago. He wrote this book Dharma Punks.
I've heard about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, some
actually, he's in
years
LA.
ago.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, someone was turning me on to that a few years ago, and I never fully explored it. But they
Yeah.
were really excited about that.
So he has a whole movement of what's it called? Something like refuge recovery, which I'm sure is a completely different languaging and
Right.
framing. Whether it has some of the same elements, I don't know, but
Right.
he's starting that all over the country apparently, and so for people who are more drawn to that kind of framework, it's also existing.
Yeah. I think that within the 12-step teachings in the literature there's something in there that says we don't have a monopoly on this thing, which I'm so glad that is in there.
Yeah.
Because if it was like, this is the only way, then no one would do it.
Yeah.
And it's something that's also brilliant about the 12 steps is it really is all about God, which again, they're 90% of the people would be like, bye, I'm out of here. But they were clever enough to throw in this one little line that says, of your own understanding. So it's like, whatever you choose to be something bigger and greater than yourself, which I think is really why it's lasted and has proliferated all over the world and helped so many people. So that's cool. I appreciate that you respect that path too. So in Buddhism, as you said, it's not really about like, oh, I believe in God. You're not like praying to God as this entity or this deity. What is your interpretation of God, and do you pray in the traditional sense? And if you do, what does that look like?
There are certainly Buddhist traditions in which you pray. I mean, Buddhism is so broad,
Right.
Like I was in LA actually, and I had breakfast with a rabbi, and I asked him a question about Judaism. We did some conference, I asked him about Judaism, and he said, "Which Judaism?" And
That's
I thought,
funny.
that applies,
Right.
It's like especially Tibetan Buddhism, you do pray. Or some schools of Japanese Buddhism, you do pray. Other schools of Japanese Buddhism, it's like if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him, It's not a really prayerful
It's definitely
approach,
not.
So it can be very different. But basically, as I was taught, the Buddha was a human being. And the things he questioned about life are the things any of us might question, like where's happiness really to be found? What about suffering? Am I as alone as it seems, as is portrayed? Would I be really happy if I were a king, which is what my father wants me to do, that kind of thing. And it said that the answers he came to about life, he came to through the power of his own awareness, and so can we. So we look at a Buddha statue and we see something about ourselves, about the capacity of a human being to understand their lives and not be seeking control, to be really happy, to know love, to know wisdom, and so on. So we look at the Buddha as a representation of human possibility. And so in a way, looking at the Buddha, we're looking at ourselves. And it's not just like the Buddha and I who are doing great. It's like we look at ourselves on that level, which is the level of our deepest potential. And we see everybody, because everybody shares that potential. So that's the nature of that relationship. We look at the Buddha to see ourselves, and we look at ourselves to see all of life, to see all beings everywhere. And in the language, Pali is the language of the original Buddhist text, so it's the language the southern schools of Buddhism usually use. A teacher is not a guru. A teacher is a spiritual friend.
That's cool.
So in the folk religion, sort of in Burma, you would pray to the Buddha, or but you wouldn't like in the monasteries so much.
That's very inviting, I think, to a lot of people probably that, from more of the Hindu perspective, you go sit in darshan before you guru, and if you're lucky enough to kiss his feet, you had a good day, right? So this is very different than from that perspective. Yeah. So there's not so much, there's a reverence for the teacher and a respect, of course, but not so much a worship.
That's right.
Okay, that's interesting. Fascinating stuff. This is so fun because this, as I said, this is a path I know very little about. I mean, I listen to you and other, Buddhism-based teachers, but it's all sort of new and the languaging as well. So, I guess in a sense, then, in terms of God, that energy or that type of prayer is almost represented by practicing loving kindness.
Yeah.
To where you're sort of reflecting the higher self within you and with others through that practice.
Right.
Like how you often talk about going into a store and there's a clerk there, and are you just ignorant of the fact that they have a life and they're a human being and they're just serving a purpose in a mechanical kind of way? Or are you able to really look in their eyes and share that moment? So inherent to that moment is identifying God. Yeah. Could you say? You
could. I personally would not.
You don't contextualize it in that way.
I don't contextualize in that way, but I mean, it's just language, It's just one way of verbalizing it.
Yeah.
So
many windows all going into the same house.
You could say found, our interconnectedness, or kind of the bigger fabric of life, of which we are all a part, or whatever.
In the Vedic system, there's this perspective that there's only one thing. Universally, everything is this one thing, and that we're individual expressions of that one thing. Does Buddhism share that perspective?
Here, Trungpa Rinpoche actually talked about a unity of emptiness, not that we're one thing, but that at the core of who we are is, I don't know how to describe it, nothing solid and congealed, but it's like energy or space or something like that.
Right.
And potentiality. The potential for wisdom, for compassion, and so on. So it's like that potentiality, which is the energy in a way.
That's cool. It's sort of like the extreme non-dual point of view that at a certain point, the witness and the observed sort of disappear, right? That's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
That's heavy stuff. I dig that. Yeah. Wow, this is fun. I love this stuff, man. I could do this all day. Honestly, this is the juice for me. So, your book, Real Love, right, which just came out in June. I have a copy of it in my bag, which don't let me forget to have her sign that, please. Very meaningful. I think a lot of people have different ideas about what love is.
Oh,
and you're exploring that. And I think if you would have asked me 10 years ago, define love, it would be like, oh, it's this feeling that you have when you care about someone, or it's your girlfriend, or, something like that, even more of a romantic love or familial love or something like that. Where are you at with that term right now in your life?
Real Love is my 10th book. And many of them have been about love, about kindness, about compassion, and so on. So obviously it's something I think about all the time. These days I would probably define love as connection, a profound sense of connection to ourselves and to others, maybe an other, and maybe all others. I think it's very different than liking somebody or approving of somebody. I don't even think it has to be an emotion. As of course in pop culture it's an emotion and it's something we yearn for and so on.
Right, like the love song.
Yeah, right. I think it's like it's sort of recognizing ourselves in one another. It's like that moment if you're talking to a stranger and you're really distracted and you're thinking about your email and then you realize that and you arrive. It's that moment where there's that just kind of simple connection. So it doesn't necessarily mean a certain form. You're going off into the sunset together, or it's romantic, or you're the love is not the commitment. The commitment may follow the love, or the form, the structure may follow the love, or maybe you never see each other again, but in that moment, there was a connection.
In terms of love that's not conditional, so I love you as long as you're doing X, Y, Z, and if you stop doing that, then I withdraw my love. Or loving someone who's maybe caught in a lower state of being, someone who's predominantly negative or perhaps even evil. How can one maintain a level of forgiveness and unconditional love for someone but still not agree with them, or perhaps decide not to participate in an interaction with them? In other words, loving someone from afar and not condoning their behavior if their behavior is inappropriate.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few things that come to my mind around that. One is I don't think we will maintain anything. I think just like in that exercise of being with our breath, we blow it and then we start over.
Right.
we're not going to maintain anything.
Okay, good. Yeah.
That's kind of overly idealistic for the truth of our...
I tend to be that way, yeah.
Okay, But then we start punishing ourselves because it's like we didn't maintain.
Right, because we didn't meet our own standards or expectations.
That's right.
Okay, cool.
So I would reframe that,
Got it.
And right off the bat, I'd separate the state of love from the action. There is such a thing as tough love. There is such a thing as fierce compassion. We might genuinely be feeling inside love, care, compassion. And for whatever reason, our best guess of the most appropriate way to respond in a certain moment in time, in a certain context, is saying no. It's having a strong boundary. It's like, no, I'm not going to give you the money, or, you can't move back in, or,
Totally. I'm familiar with that in terms of codependency, and
Exactly.
specifically if you think about a drug addict, like, hey, can I stay at your place? I just got out of jail again.
Yeah, that's right.
It would actually be a disservice to them to give them another cushion or a runway to keep hurting themselves.
That's right.
So that's more of your tough love.
Yeah, so, I think that's a mental discipline to keep reminding ourselves the action and the inner state are not the same. We come hopefully from a more and more of a place of love and care. And the action is based on discernment. It's like paying attention, and we make mistakes for sure, but that's why I call it our best guess, about the most skillful way to act. And it's always in the context. It's not a formula.
Right.
The only loving thing to do is say, yes, that's not true.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah,
we
you
make
really
a lot
don't
of
like
effort.
relativism.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Me neither. That's good.
So we really do make an effort to separate those two, the inner state from the action.
Right.
And even the word unconditional, I'm not totally sure. It's like there's a generosity to love. And we can see when there are big strings attached that it's different. And if you really want to understand that, don't even think about loving someone else. Think about loving yourself. I will love myself as long as I never make a mistake. As long as I do that perfectly. As long as, I don't skip a word when I'm giving the speech. Just whatever it is, and it's so fraught. It's so fragile that it really is not going to sustain us through the inevitable ups and downs of life. And so
that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes of yours. You can search throughout the entire universe for someone who is more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection.
Mm-hmm.
God, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's sort of...
So good.
I have heard that as from the Buddha. Some people refute that. There's some site like the Buddha never really said that or whatever. It's on there apparently. But there are versions of that you can source, from that. So think of that, is that amazing?
Yeah, it's beautiful. I get chills just reading that. I think that's why I put it in my notes. I was like, I got to cover that.
Yeah.
Because I think that's something that's been challenging for me. Since I was a little kid, I was pretty kind-hearted toward other people. I've never really been too mean to other people, but God, I've been horrendously evil to myself. So that's been like a huge lesson for me, is to learn how to be more loving with myself and accepting of myself. And it's really difficult to do, actually. It takes a lot of practice. So yeah, I appreciate that perspective very much so. What about the role of romantic and love relationships in your life? Has that been something that you've explored and learned from, or something that you've sort of put aside in favor of your career and helping people and pursuit?
I don't know that I've consciously put aside. I've had romantic relationships, and it's been a while. And my joke was that, if I was going to get involved with somebody, it needed to be somebody, who satisfied other needs of mine. So, I haven't closed the door on the possibility of a romantic relationship, but I don't have a sense of longing, I feel my life is really complete and busy, too. It would take a lot to...
I can tell.
To add something else in.
I can totally tell that, yeah. So it's like open-minded, but you feel whole in and of yourself.
I do.
And I guess one really has to have that sense in order to be open to having something healthy and fulfilling come in. If you're looking to complete yourself with someone else, which I've tried, that shit does not work.
Yeah.
You're going to call in people that are perhaps not serving your highest purpose. Okay, so as we come to the end of the interview, which I'm so gracious for, thank you again. I've got a 3-part question. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings that have influenced you in your work that you might be able to point our audience to?
I had a woman teacher named Deepa Ma. Somebody actually wrote Deepa Ma's a nickname, Deepa's mother, but somebody actually wrote a book about her. Deepa, D-I-P-A, Ma, M-A, and she's the person who told me to teach, so she changed my whole life, very powerfully. My first teacher was Goenka, and one can also explore his views on life and happiness and so on through books and or through courses that that exist. And I have a current teacher, actually, a younger Tibetan teacher named Sokny, Tsoknyi Rinpoche.
Another Rinpoche. Okay.
Who has, he travels to the States and around Europe and places teaching retreats, but he also has a few books out, which I think conveys some of the sense of what it's like to be with him.
That's awesome. I also think it's really cool that you have a teacher that's younger than yourself.
Yeah, I know. I think it's cool too.
Yeah, that's neat. It shows it's difficult. You don't want to compliment someone for having humility, but I'll just go ahead and do it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a paradox, but that definitely represents that you're teachable and humble. So where can we find your websites? Your book is Real Love. It's just out a couple months. We want people to buy that. What about social media sites, anywhere you want to send our audience?
My website is SharonSalzberg.com, just Salzberg spelled with an E, SALZBERG. And Twitter, I'm at Sharon Salzberg, and I think you can find me,
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Sharon. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Now that, my friends, is what I call a good time. What a fantastic conversation. God damn, I am lucky. I must have some good karma. Speaking of reincarnation, I really think I must have fed a bunch of starving children or some shit in the past life, because the fact that I just got to go sit down in Sharon Salzberg's apartment and ask her about the nature of life and being is just astonishing to me. And what's even more astonishing, really, is that I get to record them and share them with you. So thank you so much for joining me on another show. We're almost up to 100 episodes. And in fact, as I said earlier, this Friday, I'll be celebrating episode 100 with a special bootleg broadcast of myself live on the Sunset Strip, where I give my second public talk about spirituality and metaphysics. It's pretty damn cool, I gotta say, because I just kind of got there at 10:30 in the morning. They threw a mic on me and I just started talking about everything I've discovered in the last almost 21 years now of spiritual exploration. So it was a very liberating experience for me to go talk in front of a bunch of people, a bunch of listeners to the show included. But what was perhaps even more liberating was the fact that I got to put it out as a podcast episode. It was a very sort of vulnerable, fun thing for me to do, to just say, hey, listen, this is who I am. You hear from my guests on the show and from me to a degree, but this Friday is an opportunity for me to really share my heart and what's most meaningful to me at this point in my life. So thank you so much for joining me and Sharon on this show today. Please tune in Friday. Don't forget to just subscribe to the show. That makes it really easy. That's what I do with my favorite podcast, because I don't want to have to log in and go look at their account to see what's new. I have probably 4 or 5 that I listen to on a regular basis that I've subscribed to. And that way, every time I pick up my phone, it's like, ding, you have a new episode from Daniel Vitalis or Dave Asprey or whoever it is that I happen to be listening to. Actually, you know what? I'm subscribed to Sharon Salzberg's podcast. Of course. Duh. That's a really good one too. Jump right to that. All right. Anyway, there we go. I'm out. Peace, peace. Be with you. And don't forget to meditate today, okay? I hope you're inspired after this interview. Bye. Okay, before you drift off into Never Never Land, don't forget to come check out my next speaking engagement at Noya House Hollywood, November 2nd from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m., followed by Mercado Sagrado on November 4th and 5th. To get into these events and for all other information about anywhere that I'm appearing, you can always go to lukestorey.com lukestorey.com/events for registration and more information. That's lukestorey.com/events. I will see you soon. Okay, now that we've wrapped up another episode and are even more inspired to live a healthy, happy lifestyle, I want to remind you to go to Organifi.com. That's spelled with an I, Organifi.com. Check out the green juice powder. It's fantastic. And what's even more fantastic is that if you enter the code Lifestylist at checkout, you're going to save a whopping 20% off your order. Go to Organifi.com, enter the code Lifestylist, save 20%.